Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Under the Rainbow podcast. I am your host. My name is Kai Orvis, and my preferred pronouns are they, them. This is the official podcast of the Fenton Pride Collective. Each month, we choose a different topic to talk about, and I have a special guest on every month. This month's podcast topic is the 4th of July and the LGBTQ plus community. And this month, I have a very special guest with me on the show, Mr. Dale Weighill. I'll let him introduce himself.
All right. Thank you, Kai. I'm Dale Weighill. My pronouns are he, him. And among other things, I'm an associate vice president at Mock Community College. And I am also a Genesee County commissioner for the 8th District. Two hats that I wear among a number of hats.
Many others, yeah.
Happy to be here.
Awesome. So I guess I'll just open it up. Well, let's start with, what does the 4th of July mean to you? I think is a great question to start with.
Well, let me say that I have a bachelor's and a master's in political science, and the way I came to Mock College 27 years ago was to teach American government and U.S. politics here to students. So, we obviously cover the Declaration of Independence, which is, connected, of course, to the July 4th celebration. I would say that I view July 4th and in particular the Declaration of Independence as something that has driven progress over time. And I know that there's a certain level of controversy about that. We'll get into that, I imagine. But if you look back at the Civil War era, for example, under President Lincoln, when he was pre-Civil War and through the Civil War, he referenced the Declaration and all men being created equal. And of course, it was men, written in quill. So we know that was what it said. It wasn't men, women, and others, and didn't capture all humanity literally and explicitly. But Lincoln chose that language to say that slavery was wrong. And, his opposition, of course, said that the men who wrote it, some of them were slaveholders, and the men who signed the Declaration, some of them were slaveholders, and certainly Thomas Jefferson, who's best known as the author of those words, was a slaveholder, and in fact had, sex with his slaves, at least one, and produced children who were then enslaved. So all of that, totally awful. Can't justify it in any way. But what Lincoln, and I think others since then, when you grab a hold of the words, all men are created equal, and now we think of it as all people. I think many do anyway. Even average Americans who really haven't studied it very much, we now sort of take for granted that talking about humanity when we celebrate the Declaration and July 4th. So I think that in a lot of ways, it's been an engine of progress to say that our founding principle is that all human beings are entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And as that relates to the LGBT community, LGBT people are humans, and their humanity is no different than anyone else's humanity, and therefore they are guaranteed, in my view, those fundamental rights. So I look at it certainly is more than hot dogs and hamburgers on July 4th and barbecue and picnic. And I don't think that's not the angle that you were approaching it from anyway. But, as someone who's thought a fair amount about our country and our history and our politics and civil rights, especially, and progress for women and people of color and LGBT folks, that is how I choose to interpret it. Interestingly enough, Barack Obama has kind of got the same philosophy as I do, and maybe you're younger than I am, Kai, and your listeners are probably younger. And my guess is that the Fenton Pride Collective, it probably skews younger, but I don't know. You can tell me more about that. No, not necessarily.
It's an age range for sure. Yeah.
Okay. It's a good diverse range, but you know, Obama came to prominence with his 2004 Democratic Convention keynote, where he drew us back to the founders and those words, and in his mind, those words have led to Seneca Falls, back in 18, I think 48 with women's rights, and of course, the Civil War and the emancipation of the slaves, and women getting the right to vote in the early part of the 20th century. And then, of course, more recently, after his speech in 2004 and 2015, the Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision, deciding that marriage can be open to people who are of the same sex. And so, to me, I like to look at that through line, and hopefully that those words in the Declaration have inspired a certain amount of progress, and it's allowed to bring along people who don't really think about this in maybe a deep way,
Mhm.
but recognize at some level that all humans deserve the same unalienable rights. So that's a very long answer to a short question. Are we done?
That's it. No. No,
Okay.
that's a very that's I love how logically you explain it. And I guess being in politics, you're kind of used to that and whatnot. But it and that's how very much how I feel that the Declaration, it says in the Declaration, but there are many a group of people that choose to either ignore it or somehow skirt around it, that everyone should be created equal. And I think that's what's kind of caused this rupture in the LGBTQ plus community, at least I think that I've seen. And I guess this is where this topic kind of stemmed from over the past, I don't know, couple years or so. I've seen at least in the LGBTQ plus community, there's been kind of like a lessened liking of the 4th of July holiday. Like people aren't very in the community aren't very celebratory. And I
Hmm.
think it kind of stems from all of these, it probably does stem from all of these incidences where rights are being squished, in states like Florida and Texas and all of these, where especially like trans rights are just being taken away. So I feel like it's like our community is saying, well, why should we celebrate this holiday when we're not guaranteed the same equal rights, I think is where it all comes from.
Right, I get that, and I can't quote it directly, but do you know who Frederick Douglass is, the famous orator
Yes, of
from
course. Yes, yep.
from from the 1800s? He had a pretty famous speech. What is Fourth of July to the Negro, or what is Fourth of July to the slave? Various ways to title it,
Hmm.
but he essentially stood up. He was invited to give this oration, and I think it was in New York on Fourth of July, and did it. And they expected sort of rah rah Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal, and he made it one of his greatest rhetorical devices to say, this is your holiday, white Americans, and he was speaking to I think an all-white audience. It's not my holiday, and it's not the holiday of people who are still enslaved who look like me
Hmm.
and are, African slaves. So yeah, I mean that's a pretty common, I think, criticism of Declaration of Independence, July 4th, that there's a hypocrisy there, right?
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
And I guess there's a certain amount of privilege that people who are in the majority and who have perhaps always been in the majority in the country, and have benefited from their skin color and maybe their gender, or not maybe, but their gender,
Hmm.
and that they don't have to think about it. And they celebrate it perhaps in the original way, some of them,
Yeah,
you
with
know.
hot dogs and hamburgers.
Yeah, yeah, right. And even with some of the original philosophy, which is, that white men are intended to sort of run the world,
Yeah.
white straight men.
Yeah.
And you know, but I think that the rhetoric of the Declaration and This comes out of John Locke, an English philosopher who basically said governments are created so that anarchy can be set aside, and that there is this body that will protect humans um, from one another and guarantee some rights and prevent the stronger and the mightier from decimating, quote, the weaker or the minority.
Hmm.
And the framers of the Constitution and the founders and signed the Declaration absorbed a lot of that, and that's why they felt government was created to protect these unalienable rights. So, I think that, to me, using the Declaration and the Fourth of July as a way of saying, drawing attention to the hypocrisy.
Mm.
Uh, so maybe Kai, you should give your own. What does July 4th mean to the LGBTQ plus community speech, and do it in the Fenton Town Square or something? Basically modeling it after Frederick Douglass, but only taking it in a different direction with a new community that has, um, some resistance or some reluctance to celebrating what they perceive to be as a holiday that does not include them.
Yeah, no, actually, that's a really good idea. I might just steal that. So if you see me in the middle of Fenton giving that speech, just know it was because of Dale.
All right, give me an attribution right at the beginning, and then
Yeah,
just go on from there.
yeah, yeah. No, it is a really good idea though, and I think that's what we need, right? Is to kind of show the people that are making these anti-LGBTQ plus laws and legislation and all of this stuff, show them that we are part of this nation just like everybody else is.
Mhm. Making contributions,
Yeah.
adding to the quality of life, adding value as fellow human beings. So we just adopted at the commission a resolution. It doesn't have any enforcement mechanism, but it's recognizing June is Pride Month in Genesee County.
Hmm.
And I wrote it. So, it's the identical language to what we adopted last year, which was my first year on the commission. So I brought it last year. Last year it was approved 7-1, and we had one person absent. So there's 9 members on the county commission. We had one absent, one voted against, and then the 7 voted for it. This
Hmm.
year, the same one voted against it, but the one that was absent last year was present, and so we had an 8-1 vote in favor of it. And I started out the first paragraph with, we hearken back to our founding beliefs of this country that all people are created equal, or all human beings. So I articulated what I said at the beginning of your show in
Hmm.
writing for the
Hmm.
county. And the reason I'm bringing this up and why you made me think of it is that the individual who voted against it grounded his argument against it that it was contrary to the Christian religion in particular, and other religions, he claimed. Um, and my response was, well, we're not a theocracy in
Hmm.
Genesee. We are government.
Hmm.
The government represents everyone, and we get everyone's tax dollars, whether you believe in some form of deity or religion or whether you don't. And so gay people pay taxes, LGBTQ plus people pay taxes. So, and I literally, and then I mentioned that, well, we just said the Pledge of Allegiance, and that ends with and liberty and justice for all.
Hmm.
And I said, I'm a gay man. I add to the quality of life of this community. I'm adding to it right now on this Board of Commissioners,
Hmm.
doing it tonight as I vote and talk about issues and help my constituents. There are others like me in this community, broadly defined, who may not be in public life or elected office, but they're doctors and they're teachers and they're mechanics, and they are parents and they're friends and they're lovers, and
Hmm.
you know they're everything under the sun that is the same in this quote straight community. And um, we have not always been included, and we've been excluded in some pretty horrific ways. And this is our way of saying we acknowledge the exclusion. We are an inclusive county. The country and the county are still working on these issues, wrestling with them, but we ground ourselves in the belief that human beings deserve these rights
Hmm.
and deserve the ability to make a contribution to our society. So
Yeah.
ultimately, I won the argument 8-1.
Yes, you did. Thank
Big
you for
time.
your
See,
work on that. I mean, the whole county appreciates you for your work on that one. And I know who
real,
that other commissioner is. He's my commissioner. Nobody knows where I
mhm,
live, so.
yeah,
And yeah, we really Fenton Pride really loves him.
yeah. I what the one thing I did say was to him in the moment, and last year too, was speak your truth. I'm not going to shut you off. And I mean, I guess he could have said something that was so egregious and over the line in terms of civil discourse that probably the chair of the commission would have been prompted to stop him from speaking. But I mean, there are many people that I'm sure agree with him, and I don't want to be accused of suppressing that. And
Yeah.
I also think it's good that his views were articulated clearly by him, and I could articulate mine. And then anybody watching, anybody listening can then hopefully take something from that dialogue, that debate, and hopefully land on a position that is rational, what I think is rational, and I think easily the position that a government should take. Now, I wasn't saying that every church and every mosque and every temple need to adopt this resolution. They should do whatever they wish to do within the confines of their faith and their religious facility.
Yeah.
And but in terms of government and civil society, we need to be celebrating people that are LGBTQ plus.
Oh, absolutely. And you bring up a good point. It works both ways. And that's why the Constitution is so important, right? It's because it wasn't intended to be a set of laws, right? It was intended to be interpreted
Hmm.
per jurisdiction. So while it's awesome that we have acknowledgement of LGBTQ plus things like Pride Month and all of this, it it's totally all right for this certain commissioner to have his own viewpoint on it and use his own justification as long as it's within the same set of rules, quote unquote, right? So like it's equal rights for all people. Well, what does that mean if you're basing it off of
Hmm.
your faith?
Hmm.
Okay, you may believe that, but is that still following the principle of equal rights for everybody? That's where
And
it
clearly it's
gets
not. Yeah,
tough.
yeah, it clearly it isn't. So, the other thing is in this case, we can celebrate because we have a commission that voted 8-1 for
Hmm.
what I think is the appropriate position. But I would imagine of Michigan's 83 counties that a relative few, now the bulk of the population is in the counties that are the relative few. So
Hmm.
Metro Detroit, Genesee, Washtenaw, Ingham,
Yep.
Kent County, I think more inclined to be supportive of the position that I articulated in the resolution, but you probably got, I don't know, 70 to 75 other counties in the state that likely wouldn't pass a resolution along those lines.
Oh yeah.
And so what I'm getting at is um, in situations where the majority do harm to people, and it's not just resolutions like this that have no binding effect, passing laws, or Michigan's Constitution was amended in 2004 by a vote of the people to say marriage is defined as between a woman and a man, and that
Hmm.
passed 60-40 probably, if not more. And so that was part of our state constitution until 2015 when the Supreme Court 5-4, close vote, thank God for Justice Kennedy, um, a sweeping ruling across the country said that all the laws and the constitutional and state constitutional amendments are null and void because they're in conflict with the federal constitution. And so that's a long way of saying that when we're affected negatively as a community by people who are using, say, religion as a weapon instead of love, that we have the ability to go to court. And it took years and years and years. And finally there was a Supreme Court decision. I think that probably a topic for another show, but I think that ruling is probably at risk given what we saw with the Roe decision, 50 years of precedent and with some court decisions in between that sort of defined it a little more. But overturning Roe, you could just as easily get a majority on the court if let's say a county clerk in Lenawee County up north doesn't, or is that south? It might be south. Anyway, somewhere in Michigan, Lenawee County is my example. Clerk decides on principle that they're not going to issue a marriage license to a same-sex couple. Same-sex couple takes that into court, and if it winds its way all the way back to the Supreme Court, you could get a decision that overturns the Obergefell, which is the name of the 2015 case,
Hmm.
and then all these marriages will be subject to states imposing restrictions again. Probably Michigan's constitution would go back into effect, that amendment, the 2004 amendment, because it was only struck down because of that decision. So it probably would return, just like these abortion laws,
Yep.
anti-abortion laws from decades, 100+ years ago, go into effect because Roe was overturned. And then it becomes, state by state battle like you're doing with abortion. And that's what we did with gay marriage for a long time, before at least Vermont started in the 90s and then to 2015.
Hmm.
You can tell that I used to be a professor. I'm sorry for talking so much, Kai.
No,
Listeners
that's
there,
totally all right. I
sleeping.
I don't think that anybody wants to hear me talk for a long time. So I always appreciate the guests talking more than I do, for sure.
Okay.
But I think that might be a good time for a break. So we're going to take a break and we will come back and continue talking about the LGBTQ plus community and 4th of July. The Fenton Pride Collective wouldn't be able to help support the LGBTQ plus community in the Fenton, Michigan area without generous contributions from people like you. We are always extremely thankful for any gift, no matter how large or small. If you'd like to support our mission, head over to our website, www.fentonpride.org, to donate or even fill out our volunteer application. Join us in fighting for progress. Welcome back to the Under the Rainbow podcast, the official podcast of the Fenton Pride Collective. I'm here with, I'm Kai Orvis, president of the Fenton Pride Collective, in case you forgot. I'm here with Dale Weighill today. We're talking about the LGBTQ plus community and 4th of July slash rights slash politics slash all of it.
All of the above.
All of the above. So before the break, we were talking about a little bit of declaration slash religion slash all this stuff. And it got me thinking, a question popped into my head. So you obviously know the Declaration of Independence really well.
Mhm.
And I would assume that you know the Michigan Constitution really
Well, I
well.
sort of, I sort of kind of know it. I swore an oath to uphold it as a county commissioner. I'll say I haven't read it in a while, but
Okay.
I, I know enough to be dangerous. So let's see if I can answer
Fair.
whatever you're going to pose.
Well, my question is, does anywhere, for those that use theology or religion as a reasoning for anything, any decisions or anything, is there anywhere that says that you can do that?
That you can do it like affirmatively?
Yes. Use it to justify a decision.
Not in the Michigan Constitution. No. But I also don't think there's anything in the Michigan Constitution that says you can't use that reasoning.
You can't use it. Yeah.
Now, what I would say is that you're probably more appropriate to look at, say, the First Amendment, and the 14th Amendment in the federal Constitution, because you've got, quote, infamously called, or famously, I should say, called separation of church and state in the First
Hmm.
Amendment. U.S. Constitution. So that prevents an establishment of religion by government, which, you could argue that that basically says that if a law is passed that has explicit religious overtones, and it's done, if the record is clear that it's done for the purposes of a particular religious worldview, maybe even just within a religion where parts, because you and I know that there are elements of Christianity that don't agree on this topic.
Hmm.
So, well, that's why I'm saying it's part of one religion, maybe a sliver or a bigger sliver. But so the Establishment Clause is designed to draw that distinction between government, the public sphere, and the private religious sphere. I guess where you get into sort of a gray area and lots of arguments since the beginning of time in the beginning of our nation is that, you know, uh, can you make a moral argument? Some people would say you have to have a religion, some basis of religion, I guess, to make a moral argument. And to me, a moral argument is equality among people. And getting back to the Declaration, I don't know that well, I mean, they said that how did they start that? It's these unalienable rights are given to us by our Creator. I mean, that's the other piece we didn't talk about. So they threw religion into a place that I am looking to as inspiration for sort of a secular belief that all human beings have this inherent worth and should be equal in terms of their ability to strive and
Hmm.
um, benefit themselves and their fellow people and be protected for who they are, certainly as long as they're not injuring or harming anybody else. So, but the founders or the framers, I should say, or founders did put, the creator is in there. And so your point about the Michigan Constitution, I don't think it prohibits religion from being used, but the tools are the federal level. So the 14th Amendment also says there's equal protection of the laws. And so the 14th Amendment has been used. So in Brown versus Board of Education, where school districts and schools were segregated by law in many states, and principally in the South. Um, but the NAACP and Thurgood Marshall, case after case after case, these cases finally get to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court says that the 14th Amendment guarantees equal protection and separate schools just separate alone is unequal, but
Right.
the matter is they were also separate and extraordinarily under-resourced for students of color.
Hmm.
And so those same arguments can apply to laws that draw a distinction and make people in the LGBTQ plus community inferior under certain laws, like not being able to marry or not having the same civil rights protections in terms of where they want to live and going into a restaurant and being served like everyone else is served, employment discrimination. So, I think there's probably more at the federal level. Now, Michigan did pass an amendment to the Elliott-Larsen Act. So we have a state civil rights law in Michigan called Elliott-Larsen,
Hmm.
and it has been around since I want to say the 60s, late 60s, early 70s, and it's named after someone named a state legislator named Elliott, last name, and Larson was the last name of the other person. So Elliott-Larsen is the name of the law. And for years, it was what we would think of as traditional protections for traditionally, minoritized groups. So women, for example, people
Hmm.
of color, the disabled community, people, religious minorities. So those were all built into it essentially from the beginning. But the LGBTQ plus community has been working for years through Equality Michigan as an organization and others to amend the Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act in the state to include protections for LGBTQ plus. And Governor Whitmer, I got invited to the signing ceremony, and it was in Lansing. I don't. It was like at a restaurant, and I don't know. I think must have been one of the first gay establishments in Lansing, and it was in Old Town. And
Hmm.
so big crowd there, and the governor spoke, and the legislators who passed it, the amendment this time, it's Senator Jeremy Moss out of Oakland County, big proponent, part of our community. He led the charge to add it to the state civil rights law. But one of the original authors, I can't remember if it was Elliott or if it was Larson, because one of them has passed away, but the other one was there
Oh, no way.
and got to speak. And it was a gentleman. And like I said, I don't know which one he was, but this was a now he's an older white gentleman, straight guy, I'm certain, probably in his 80s or even maybe approaching 90. And he talked about how he partnered with a black woman who was the other piece of the name
Hmm.
of Detroit, and he was from somewhere else in the state. And they came together. I think he was a Republican, she was a Democrat, to create this Elliott Larson civil rights law, the original version 50 years ago. And how proud he was to see that a new group of people who have been discriminated against and marginalized in law and custom were now at least being brought into the law part of it for the state of Michigan. So if you use religion as a weapon and you violate Elliott Larson, it's not a justification.
No,
You're not
right.
going to be able to do it.
Yeah, it's that whole like it has to justify the ends has to justify the means or whatever, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So that happened recently, the Elliott Larson
Mhm.
expansion.
Last year.
Oh,
Yeah,
why did I not know about that? That's like a big thing.
big deal. It's a big deal. I think that, for a future show, I don't know if you've got relationships with, say, Senator John Cherry, Representative Jasper Martis, Representative Cindy Neely. These are state reps and our state senator. I'd be happy to connect them with you. Maybe have one or two of them on your show, or one of them and someone from Equality Michigan to talk about that historic achievement. Because if you don't know about it, there's a lot of others that don't realize it, that we have made progress in Michigan just in the past couple years.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely need to have them on the show. And we could talk like just specifically about that because I want to know the whole story behind it. I want to know, yeah, the road to where how they ended up where they're at. Yeah.
It's a fascinating story, and I've only given you just a little bit of it because I mean I wasn't in the middle of it all, but I got to be at the ceremony and applaud.
Yeah, I mean, that's cool enough just to be there. But
Mhm.
it's definitely a big, I mean, yeah, it kind of interlinks the whole like using the Constitution and helping the LGBTQ plus community. Because I think that's kind of the moral of the whole thing here is that we might not feel like we're included a lot of the time, but it's almost like we have to push to include ourselves,
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely.
Like
It's
if
like
we're being excluded, let's use 4th of July as a holiday to say, hey, we're here, we're queer, get
yeah,
used to it. Let's
yeah.
start making legislation in our at least local municipalities, whatever,
Mhm.
to better our cause and guarantee us the same protections as everyone else.
I think just from a purely I agree. I agree with all that. And I think from a purely strategic standpoint, there's what I would call people that are kind of just in the middle on all this and don't understand who's who and what the arguments are. And
Right.
once you explain it, they're like, well, of course people should be treated the same and treated with fairness and dignity and the same rights. Um, but they don't, I don't think because they don't live it every day, they don't, and they have the privilege of not living it every day, right? They have to be reminded.
Hmm.
And one way of reminding people is to use the nation's core values for our cause,
That's
just like
exactly it.
African Americans did, and Martin Luther King, and the rhetoric of the 1960s civil rights movement, the 50s and 60s, and the 14th Amendment and Thurgood Marshall and all that. So, yes, I agree.
Yeah, yeah. They don't live it every day. Like, cis straight white people don't live it every day, so they don't see it. So it's almost like you're right. We do have to remind them of the values, but also like, I don't know if you see this, but this is what we go through every day,
Mhm.
or
Yep.
maybe less so in Michigan now because we have more that our wonderful governor has helped along here and other legislators. But you
Yeah,
know,
she's a big fan of the LGBTQ community in many ways, clearly legislatively, but just a huge supporter and ally. One of her daughters is in our community.
Oh, I
Don't know
didn't
if
know
you.
that.
Mhm. Yeah.
Wow. It was recent
I
too
feel
that
like
I
we're
learned.
both learning lots of things today.
Yeah, look at that. No, it was recent that I learned that our oh my, what is, I don't remember her title. Our general attorney did no.
Attorney General
Attorney
Dana Ness.
General is
Mhm.
part of the community as well. I
She's
didn't
married.
learn that until probably this year, and I was like, wait a minute, what?
Hmm.
Yeah. So we have friends and allies all over Michigan, which makes it, I would say, a lot easier than other states like Florida and Texas and
For
whatnot.
sure. For sure.
So at least members of our community are struggling, and I don't think that cis straight white people in our community see that and go, "Oh, well, that's Florida. Oh, well, that's Texas. Just don't go there." Well, it's part of these people are part of our community, and what's to stop that from happening to us in the future?
Well, yeah, and it's a bit to make the comparison. What comparisons are always flawed or analogy, but it's like Northerners shouldn't have been concerned about slavery. Well, yeah, just because we're not enslaved and we don't have slaves in our state back in the 40s, 50s, into the 60s, doesn't mean we don't take a moral position to the point of fighting a civil war with our white countrymen
Right.
over that issue so that we could free 4 million people held in bondage in a complete violation of America's founding principles.
Yeah, it's the same thing. If the Northerners would have just said, "Meh, we don't have it up here, not our problem." Like,
Yeah,
who knows? Slavery might still be around, and I think everyone that lives in America or in the world can agree that slavery is obviously not a good thing. So
right.
it's the same thing. That's actually a really good analogy, not flawed.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so we have one last segment that I like to do with everyone. If you do, I mean, do you have anything to add before we moved on to the
I have
fact or
probably
fiction?
said more than enough. You're going to have to edit.
No, no, it's good. It's good content. It's better than a lot of what I could come up with, that's for sure.
Well, and as the host, you try to bring on people who may know things that you don't
Exactly.
and pick their brains.
Yeah, that's what
I
makes
know I know a lot about very small range of topics. You just happen to hit on one where ask me how to fix the car or change a tire, and I will say you call a tow truck.
ditto
So,
right
so
there with you. So I'm glad that worked out. Okay, so our tiny segment at the end of every episode that I like to do is called fact or fiction.
Hmm.
So it's basically like true or false.
Mhm.
I'm gonna say a statement and you're gonna tell me whether it's fact or fiction, whether you think it's fact or fiction. Now, in preparing these prior to the episode starting, I did not realize you would know so much about this topic. So we'll try.
Okay. Well, you know,
Okay,
they always ask me about how to fix a car or a muffler or something. Throw that in.
I'll just throw that one in there. Yeah. So the first one, fact or fiction? Pride marches started June 28th, 1970, on the 1 year anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising.
It's a fact.
Fiction.
Why?
Technically, fiction. It's a tough one. They started on July 4th of 1965 on Independence Day. A group of
Hmm.
courageous, well, this is what the interwebs told me. A group of courageous gay and lesbian activists from New York, Washington, D.C., and Philadelphia led the foundation of the organized LGBTQ plus or LGBT civil rights movement with demonstrations in front of Independence Hall,
Hmm.
known as annual reminders. These protests of East Coast homophile organizations, I think that's how you say that word, occurred every 4th of July from 1965 to 1969.
Hmm. Did they call it a pride march or they called it the other term that you used?
I think I said Pride March. Yeah. No, they didn't call them Pride. Well, I think they're what would be considered like Pride marches.
Yeah, the equivalent of a Pride March. So I always thought that because I watched a documentary probably in the last 6 months about Stonewall on PBS,
Mhm.
and it could be that just Stonewall is trying to take credit for starting the Pride marches. But I do know that a year after Stonewall, there was a significant Pride March, and maybe that's the first time they use that phrase explicitly in New York. But so
Yeah.
I'm not arguing the point, Professor. If I was your student, I'd be totally arguing the point, but I
Well,
get at
that's
least a point for that.
oh, okay, half a point. That yeah,
Okay,
that's fair.
cool.
No, no, I think I know that there's also been a lot of misconstrued facts about Stonewall and the Stonewall riots, and like I know that. Well, no, I don't know this now because people have thrown this into the question that Marsha P. Johnson didn't even throw a brick,
Hmm,
is what I've heard,
hmm.
and
Maybe it
like
was a
the whole
clutch,
what?
like a clutched purse.
It could have been a purse. I don't know. But the whole,
Mhm.
the whole thing was
As
Marsha P.
heavy as a brick,
Johnson threw the first brick. Yeah. But no.
right? Well, she's like Paul Revere. Who knows what Paul Revere actually did?
Exactly.
Um,
She's how great. She's the Paul Revere of the LGBTQ plus movement.
I just came up with that.
Your analogies are like perfect. Okay, second one, fact or fiction. You're probably gonna know this. In 2015, the Supreme Court ruled that same-sex marriage is legal in all 50 states.
Oh yeah, that's a fact.
It is a fact. You mentioned it earlier.
Hmm.
I can never remember how to pronounce it. It's Obergefell.
Yeah, and I'm probably not pronouncing it, but Obergefell was the plaintiff and was the gentleman who was married to another man coming out of a state that banned it. And so, they walked into a courthouse or the clerk's office and said, "We want a marriage." They were denied under that state's laws and, made its way up to I think it might have been Ohio, made its way to the Supreme Court. And that was the case.
Yeah. Do you know the ruling on that?
The vote,
Yeah, the Supreme Court
five,
ruling.
5-4, right?
It was
Was it
five to
five
four.
four? Yeah, yeah, okay. Because
Yep.
I said that earlier, and now you made me think, oh God, was it 6-3? But
Oh,
let
did
me
you say
see.
5 to 4 earlier? I didn't catch that.
No, I said 5-4 earlier in the show, but so Justice Kennedy, I think, wrote the majority opinion. Justice Ginsburg, Justice Kagan, Justice Sotomayor, and Justice Ginsburg.
Ginsburg, yeah, of course.
That's five, right? Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
Different court these days, which is why what I said earlier is important to remember that just because this right was given in 2015 doesn't mean it can't be taken away by a future court.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Remember that, everyone. Okay, last one, fact or fiction. The first openly LGBTQ plus person appointed to a federal position requiring confirmation by the US Senate
Oh
was
boy.
was Pete Buttigieg.
I think that's fiction.
You're right. That is not, it wasn't Pete Buttigieg.
Is there an ambassador?
It was Roberta Achtenberg, an assistant secretary for fair housing and equal
Yeah.
opportunity at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development under Bill Clinton in
Right.
1993.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Say what you will about Bill Clinton. He was probably the most pro LGBTQ president up to that point.
Oh, up to that point. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
took it to another level. Now he also signed Defense of Marriage Act and all that, but
right.
that's another show.
See, that's what I remember him for because
And don't ask
I
me to.
don't know if I was born when he was president.
So he was president from January of 1993 to January of 20, or excuse me, 2001.
Okay, yeah. So I was. But that was when I was first born.
Mhm.
It was the beginning of my life. But I mean, I think I would assume that a lot of what he had done kind of set the stage for.
Well,
later
and
things.
he put Justice Ginsburg on the court.
Oh, he did? I didn't know that.
Yeah, he did. 1990. Well, no, that would have been 95 or 96, I think. Oh, he was elected in 92. So probably 92, 93, 94, somewhere in there.
Remember that? Wow.
Ginsburg was his, I think, first appointment.
That's a legacy in its own right there.
Yep. Well, I've enjoyed your show.
Well, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. It was very insightful, and I think our listeners definitely have gained at least some knowledge or hopefully a new perspective. Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Well, thank you. Thanks again. And anytime I can help, please let me know.
Absolutely. Thank you. Appreciate it. Now, tell the listeners where, I mean, I don't know if you want to, where they can reach you at or if, you
Mhm.
know.
So if people want to reach me about Mott College or the Genesee County Commission or anything else, my email address, I'll give you my general Yahoo, which dates me, right? So it's Dale Weighill, one word. So DaleWeighhill at yahoo.com.
Awesome. Reach out if you have questions about MCC, Mount Community College, or the commission, or what would you, it's Board of Commissioners, right?
Genesee County Board of Commissioners.
Is what the group, the organization, I guess, or whatever
Yeah.
is called. I almost called it the commission, like it's a big entity that oversees, like Big Brother.
Maybe I'll start saying that if I get reelected, and we'll put that on all the letterhead. Just the commission.
Just the commission. I think it would, yeah. It's intimidating, right? Well, awesome. Thank you for coming on. Appreciate
Yep,
it.
you're welcome.
And for those that are listening, I'll see you next month on another episode of Under the Rainbow, the official podcast of the Fenton Pride Collective. If you have a business or organization and would like to advertise on Under the Rainbow, the official podcast of the Fenton Pride Collective, then go to our website, fentonpride.org, and fill out the application under the podcast tab. We have different options to suit your budget and needs. It's a great way to expand your customer base. One last thing before we go, the legal stuff. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be considered legal health, financial, or educational advice. The individual views expressed in this podcast may not reflect or represent those of the Fenton Pride Collective. Unless stated otherwise, Fenton Pride Collective does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast.